Welcome to another Because Miami. I have missed you, Billy Corben. It's been too long. The corruption has fermented and fomented and gotten all the worse while we were off, but it is a happy new year with some of the same stories we've had before. We will get to Latin American dictators retiring to South Florida. We will get to federal immigration officials being swamped and overwhelmed by Cuban migrants arriving in the Keys. Before we do that, however...
Feliz Año Nuevo.
Gracias.
Don't forget the Enye, right?
Well, this is
Feliz,
a thing
it's not Feliz Ano.
It's been happening to me lately because I can't find it on my cell phone, the Enye. So I do wish people a happy new anus by text. That's something that I do.
Dan, you just hold the N down, and the Enye will magically appear.
I now learn that. I did not know that. I've been enjoying wishing everybody a happy new anus. Regardless, I wanted to talk to you because during the break, while you're 4 years old, while I was sick, I got to, because it's so easy to watch, I got to watch the original Cocaine Cowboys again, which is a delight. It is very easy to watch. And what I wanted to ask
you... On bootleg DVD? Did you buy it in a strip club men's room? Where'd you get that?
I don't remember where it is that I saw it. It might have been Prime Video. I found it somewhere, and it was. It's just very easy to watch. And what I wanted to ask you is to explain to the audience, because I don't believe the audience listening to us nationally or internationally knows just how deep this runs in Miami, but you have a unique expertise here, just how much the city of Miami is built upon cocaine trafficking from the 70s and 80s, and how Miami has become an international city because of, I would say, because of cocaine more than anything else.
Probably in no small part. Yeah, I don't know that there's, and this kind of fits in with all of my theses. I mean, first and foremost, the idea that Miami has no indigenous industry and it subsists from hustle to hustle. This totally explains, the crypto cowboys. It totally explains the real estate hustle, the tourism hustle, that, all of the hustles of Miami are defined in no small part by this Cocaine Cowboys era, which I'd refer to as the only successful real world case study of Reagan's trickle down economics, where this illicit trade boomed and these narco dollars, this narco economy absolutely trickled down into every facet, legitimate public sector, private sector, illegitimate sector of this community, and literally built the foundation, found its way into the foundation and built the city of Miami.
You're talking literal building, the scaffolding, the buildings, the skyline are built by laundered money and just how easy it was to get drugs and cocaine into South Florida.
Yeah, it was known as America's Casablanca in the 1980s, and it was the ultimate transshipment point for illicit products all throughout history. Whether it was, you look at Everglades City, for example. I mean, they were doing, they were smuggling exotic animals. They were smuggling immigrants. They were smuggling marijuana. Florida has thousands upon thousands of miles of virtually unpatrolled shorelines, particularly in the 1960s, 70s, into the 80s, even the 90s. And so what you saw was just opportunity. Our proximity to Latin America, where cocaine was being grown and manufactured, and then transshipped here. And what the initially, a lot of that transportation was done by the Cuban exile community, many of whom had been trained by the CIA to go into Cuba and overthrow Castro, and then suddenly found themselves out of work because in the late 1950s, early 1960s, one of the top employers in Dade County was the CIA. In fact, the largest CIA substation outside of their headquarters in Langley, Virginia, is known as GM Wave. That doesn't mean anything. It was just CIA talk. GM Wave, located next to what was known as the University of Miami South Campus by Zoo Miami. And so all these guys found themselves out of work, but they knew how to fly planes. They knew how to sneak into shit with boats. And the next thing you know, they were smuggling drugs. And then you could get a kilo of cocaine at that time, late 70s, early 80s, on the shores of Colombia, or on a dirt gravel airstrip in the jungles of Colombia for maybe $5,000 a kilo. Once you got into the U.S., you could get over $50,000 for it. So the risk and reward factor there was in the transportation. So the Colombians why are we letting the Cubans get all the upside? Why don't we contract with people, and that's what caused the cocaine wars. Is that the Colombians tried to move out of wholesale and into, out of selling in Colombia into transporting and selling here in the United States, where the profit was. And we're talking about the top industries in Miami in the early 1980s, according to Time magazine, were tourism and real estate, generating upwards of $8-9 billion a year. Drugs were estimated to be a $12 billion a year industry in South Florida in Dade County, meaning that the number one industry above and beyond tourism, real estate, anything, with a bullet, literally, bro, was the cocaine trade, the drug trade.
If you had to, obviously, I don't know that this math can be empirically provable, but if you had to take a guess at how much of what early Miami is built in the 70s and 80s and 90s, like what percentage of that was built by the cocaine trade, by there being no rules and very little governance of how it was getting into this part of the country?
Well, I mean, I think the ultimate symbol is probably right there on Brickell. You have some of the most iconic and famous structures in Miami. Made famous in no small part because they were featured in beautiful aerial shots in the opening credits, Miami Vice every single week on NBC throughout the 1980s. And those are those beautiful Architectonica buildings. The one that kind of looks like a rainbow staircase. The other one has the hole in the middle of it with that cool circular staircase and everything. Those buildings were built during a worldwide recession, during an oil crisis. There was no demand anywhere in the world for luxury anything, let alone real estate and condos. But there was in Miami. And it wasn't just luxury condos and real estate, but the Mutiny Hotel in Coconut Grove, the number one seller in the world of Dom Perignon champagne. They had to gut a hotel room and convert it into a refrigerated walk-in freezer to cool the Dom Perignon that they were selling. Mayer's Jewelers here in Miami, the number one seller of Rolex wristwatches in the entire world. So luxury goods, luxury products. And when I say it trickled down into everything, you would notice this in working class neighborhoods of Miami in the 80s. Everybody, even if you were not in the drug business, you were indirectly benefiting from it. Everyone had a new toy, a Porsche in the driveway, adding a pool, adding a second story. Everybody had extra cash sticking around. The woman who cut my hair for about 25 years, she told me a story about the 1980s. She's a kid cutting hair, and people would kiss her goodbye after they'd be leaving, and they'd slip a tip into her little pocket, in her smock pocket. And she'd go home at the end of the day. She'd turn her pockets inside out and little crumbled up and rolled up bills and everything. And she looks at her roommate and she says, look at this. She found one of the ladies slipped in her pocket a tiny little baggie of a white powder. And she says, she goes, I was so naive. I go, what is this? And she said, well, that's worth more than its weight in gold. So that's the best tip you got today. And that was just Miami in that time.
Banks as well, one of the things in Cocaine Cowboys that I loved. And I will get to the things that have happened here locally, including Dixie Dent, a guest, a former judicial assistant to Martin Zilber, a judge who was doing very Miami judge things, will join us later in the show. But one of the things in revisiting Cocaine Cowboys, and I urge you to do so as an audience because he makes exceptional documentaries, and that was one of the first, is how many banks sprouted up in Miami just because all of this money needed to be cleaned.
And international banks at that. Every Latin American country had an outpost here, had a branch, mostly on Brickell in Miami. I mean, when you watch Scarface is a documentary. It may be a little operatic. It may pack a lot into a fictitious story about a Mariolito turned cocaine kingpin fastened into this story. It was a remake of a story about the Italian mafia. And but what was accurate about that was all of the facts about Miami, including the fashion in which the bankers were forced to handle this money laundering operation, because they knew they were money laundering operations. They knew that the Federal Reserve Bank, their branch in Miami, had a cash surplus more than all of the other branches in the entire nation combined. Cash became a liability, because where the hell do you store all of this cash? And the banks couldn't do it. The banks started to charge a vig. Guys started showing up just like Tony Montana does with duffel bags full of cash. And the bankers are like, I don't know where to put this. I got to charge you a percentage. I got to charge you for bringing. Everybody usually wanted cash. Now it's like, no. we need to charge you money for giving us all this cash, because they knew they were basically at that point money laundering operations, but that wasn't good enough. The legit banks turning crooked weren't good enough. A group of cocaine traffickers helped set up their own bank, Sunshine State Bank. This was a bank entirely basically opened and designed for virtually no other purpose than to launder drug money. It was ultimately shut down by the feds because of it. A couple guys who knew Willie Falcone and Sal Magluta, the subjects of Cocaine Cowboys, The Kings of Miami, now streaming on Netflix, they opened this bank strictly for that purpose. And what's funny is you flash forward to the Great Recession, and there was another bank that went belly up during the Great Recession, and they got bailed out, of course, by the taxpayers. It was called U.S. Century Bank. This bank, much like the Sunshine State Bank, was a bank put together almost entirely by real estate developers. And it turned out upwards of like 90% of the loans the bank was making was entirely to insiders, people who helped form the bank, who are on the board of the bank. And then in the Great Recession, Florida was ground zero for the Great Recession. The FDIC had to open an office in Florida because we were the capital of foreclosures, of bank closures. We were the capital of everything in the Great Recession. But they got a $50 million TARP bailout, this bank. So follow me. A group of real estate guys, quote unquote, open a bank, give themselves a bunch of loans, default on those loans in the Great Recession, and then the federal government, the taxpayers, come and bail them out. So what I'm saying is that this is just a cycle of boom and bust in Miami, of subsisting from hustle to hustle. The major difference is that back in the day, there was kind of a tacit approval of what was going on. As long as there was the drugs and the money, it was all good. As soon as the violence poured out into the street, because you can't enforce an illicit trade in the court system. You're not going to, if you give, cocaine was a consignment business because it was so expensive. You give someone 4 kilos and you say, hey, I'm going to come pick up $200,000 from you. How much time you need? I'll see you in a week. And you don't have the money. They're not going to file a court action against you. They're going to kill you and maybe your family. And sometimes that violence would turn into shootouts in high noon at the Dadeland Mall on a summer day with mothers pushing children in strollers. And that's where people really put their foot down. But Maurice Ferre, the mayor at the time, reluctantly admitted in the early 1980s that, yes, we have most certainly, I'm not proud of it, but we have certainly benefited from the illicit cocaine trade and drug money laundering. The difference is now our politicians openly embrace the con. They themselves are proud grifters, and they will basically say, like, I'm here, what are you going to do about it?
We will get to Mayor Francis Suarez in that vein, urging Elon Musk to move Twitter's headquarters.
He's so vain. From
San Francisco to Miami. But before we do that, we've got a lot of topics to get to. So let's start with Latin American dictators retiring to South Florida. Tell me what needs to be known here. Tell the audience what needs to be known here. Well,
bienvenido Bolsonaro. I mean, listen, if you are a corrupt politician looking to avoid criminal accountability, Florida is open for business. The free state of Florida is open for business. And there's an amazing, a classic, I dare call it, article by Tim Elfrink, formerly of the Miami New Times. He now was poached by the Washington Poach, stole all of our talent down here in Miami, including David Ovalier, our last guest of the Because Miami podcast, is now dead to me because he's leaving the Miami Herald and going to the Washington Post. I wish him well. We're going to miss him down here. In a world where we need more David Ovaliers, we get more Bolsonaros. That's basically what's happening here. But in this amazing 2010 article from Tim Elfrink in the Miami New Times, he goes through all of the, third world dictators who basically came to Miami, vacationed. Most of them bought homes or palaces here. Some of them fled here. He goes through Machado of Cuba, Gilberto Jordan of Guatemala, Batista, of course, of Cuba, Prosper Avril, Ricardo Hurtado from Peru. It's this Somoza from Nicaragua. It's this amazing list of tyrants. Some of them legit absolute murderers, people who destroyed their countries and destroyed the lives of millions of people chilling at mansions and properties in Miami. And he actually gives you a guide of the addresses that you can go to visit the homes and locations of these. The headline is Latin American dictators love South Florida, but it's not just Latin America. It's Haiti, now Brazil, and of course Fidel. When Fidel was looking to raise money for his misadventure in Cuba, which everybody thought was going to be a different thing than what it turned out to be, in 1955 he toured the Batista exiles of Miami, raising money for his revolution here, right here in South Florida.
Any details on the Bolsonaro home? Any details on the real estate that the dictator of Brazil is getting here in South Florida? Is he living the way as lavishly as a Latin American dictator should?
Well, not yet. I'm sure he absconded with some money. I mean, mostly the goal was to get the hell out to avoid the inauguration and duck any possible criminal penalties for the crimes that he committed. But he is right now staying at a friend's house in a gated community of Orlando. And of course, there's always got to be a sports connection. It's an MMA fighter by the name of This Is Not My World. But yes, he's a Brazilian MMA fighter, Jose Aldo, in Orlando. That's where he's
one of the greats, Jose Aldo. You mentioned Fidel Castro. Tell people what's happening in the Keys
real propensity to strong men.
Yes,
I'm sensing.
Tell the people what's happening in the Keys with the Cuban immigrants. Cuban migrants. More than 500 of them.
Yeah, more than 500 of them since like last week. It is an insane influx that the sheriff of Monroe County in the Florida Keys is calling a humanitarian crisis. And it's not just Cubans. In fact, days after this wave of Cuban migrants actually shut down the federal park at Dry Tortugas, the national park, a group of nearly 100 Haitian immigrants fleeing violence and tyranny in Haiti arrived in a gated community in Key Largo. And this is just like, I mean, talk about history repeating. I mean, this is like it's like the return of the Balseros, back in 1994, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, who bolstered the Castro regime for 30 years at that point.
Balseros is Spanish for rafters.
Rafters, yeah. And throughout history, there have been waves of Cuban, exiles migrating to South Florida. There was Pedro Pan with the children, the Catholic Church bringing them over parentless here, desperate parents putting their kids onto planes. There was the Mariel boat lift of 1980. There was the Balsero era, the rafter era of 1990. This is the reason why the Florida Straits are known as the world's largest graveyard, because of the Haitian and Cuban migrants who brave absolutely treacherous, shark-infested waters and outrageous weather of the tropics.
Literally throw their lives to the wind.
Yeah.
To get off of the island.
And people have to understand, these are not boats as you think of a boat in your mind. These are makeshift ramshackle rafts. I mean, like
tires and wood and just things stuck together.
Whatever they can find. Now, some of them they use lawnmower parts if they can find them in Cuba to try and build some semblance of a motor. I mean, it is an absolutely almost suicidal act of desperation, is what this is. And
they make it here. And
some of them make it here. In fact, from about 5 months in 94, 35,000 Cubans arrived in South Florida. We don't know exactly how many didn't arrive. We may never know how many. The Sharks may know how many arrived. Again, Florida Straits, the world's largest graveyard. But now we're seeing 500 in less than a week. Last year at the border, over 200,000 Cubans were found trying to enter the United States. So it seems certainly that there is a crisis, but it's born out of desperation. As the Balsero era in 1994, again, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba was, devastated economically. People were eating 1/5 of the rations they ordinarily would receive. There was no work. There was no electricity. They'd go 20 hours. They were rationing like power and water. And people were like, that's it. I'm out of here. for obvious reasons. And it's similar to what's happening now with the human rights crackdown against dissenters and protesters, with the recession, with the pandemic. People are desperate in Cuba and Haiti.
I want to get to this story. It's got some weaving in it. So George Santos's campaign loans that involve sugar daddy.
Should we, where do we begin? Let's begin at the beginning.
Sugar daddy John Ruiz, who is a supporter of the University of Miami program and seems like somebody who's got an undercurrent of malfeasance that is perpetually around but has not yet been proven. What are the
carefully
parts,
worded?
What are the
carefully
parts
worded.
of this story?
Meadowlark Business Affairs reviewed that introduction.
I don't know how. You go ahead and have at it if you want to describe John Ruiz differently than I just did.
George Santos,
of course, that's where
which
you
is
prefer.
one of his 6 names.
This is why you don't want any more cease and desist. Go ahead and give me whatever you got on George Santos.
I bathe in cease and desist. I backstroke through pools of cease and desist like Scrooge McDuck. Are you kidding? Diving in. So, George Santos, who people are referring to as the talented Mr. Santos, after the talented Mr. Ripley, I refer to him as Congressman Cunanan. So let's talk about who is this guy. A guy who, if he had been caught in these lies in any other sector, in the private sector, in academia, he would have been fired or thrown out of a school. But this is government, so we put him in the House of Representatives, Dan.
It's a flabbergasting amount of lies. Nothing about this person seems to be true. This person's resume, history, where he went to college.
Let's do it. Cue the carts. We'll do some to-does.
His family story has a lot of lies in it. His entire resume has a lot of lies in it. Let's tackle them one by one with the fanfare that you've grown to enjoy here from, our entire perch at the top of the entertainment ladder.
George Santos claimed he had a bachelor's.
It's too early, Roy. Come on, get your timing right.
He had a bachelor's from Baruch College and a master's from NYU. He never attended either of those schools. He said he worked for Goldman Sachs and Citigroup as an asset manager. Not only did he work for neither of those companies, but he's not listed in the database that he would need to be licensed to do so. He claimed to own 13 residential and commercial properties. He does not now, nor has ever owned any property. He claimed his Jewish family escaped the Nazis by fleeing Ukraine. They are from Brazil and they're not Jewish. He claimed he was biracial, half black. He is not. He claimed he's been openly gay for 10 years, but at the time he said that, he had been secretly married to a woman for 7 of those years. He claimed that he lost 4 employees in the Pulse nightclub massacre here in Florida. None of the 49 victims of that tragic act of terrorism had any ties to George Santos. He claimed to live at an address in the district he was elected in, yet the owners of that property deny it, and now he says, no, I live with my sister, is what I meant to say. He claimed to have no criminal record, yet he apparently has admitted to stealing a checkbook and going out on a shopping spree in Brazil back in 2008. And not only does he not own any property, but he wrote a bad check to a landlord and got a $12,000 judgment against him in New York. He claimed that his mother died on 9/11 and also claimed that she died from 9/11 related cancer in 2016. The reality is that she not only did not die of 9/11, she did die in 2016, but had no ties whatsoever to 9/11, the cleanup, or anything that could possibly link her death to it. He claimed that he has a charity nonprofit for animals, yet no such organization can be found in any public database. Here's where it gets interesting. In 2020, Santos disclosed that he had a salary of $55,000 and a negative net worth. Yet in 2002, he claimed a $700,000 salary, dividends worth between 1 and 5 million and a net worth of as much as 11.5 million. So the question is, how did he go from having no money to being a millionaire in the course of 1 year? Well, there's always a Miami connection, Dan. So the question,
what happened to the fanfare on that last allegation?
Well, he wasn't finished.
I'm getting mysterious. This is the transition. Do we have like a mysterious kind of like?
No, we don't.
A mysterious. You just wanted a mysterious. Okay, I'll do that for you.
We
Go
gotta
ahead.
get the.
Ooh, we're doing it together. Ooh.
Jesus, it's like the.
Just talk.
It's like the Foley team from Yellowstone
go
in
ahead,
here.
Just
what
talk.
is happening?
We're giving you your production, so
Okay.
just tell us what the mysterious connection is.
So the question is, what do we know about Congressman Cunanan and George Santos? What we know is that in 2016, he was registered to vote in both Florida and then shortly thereafter in New York. And we know that he was working for a company back when he was making this apparently $55,000 salary that the SEC accused of being a Ponzi scheme. This was, of course, a Florida financial company that the SEC accused of being a Ponzi scheme. So he obviously is no longer employed by this Ponzi scheme. And he said, and he starts another Florida company called DeVolder. So what is DeVolder? Well, the Daily Beast put out a story that could at least answer part of the question of what is this mystery Florida company and where did his money come from? Because it seems that he's saying he is DeVolder and he loaned the money for his campaign from this company, which if the company is just a shell corporation to funnel money to his campaign, that would be illegal. But where did the money come from? So here's the answer to that question.
Do you need some mystery from us? Some mystery sounds from us?
Mystery is
Stugotz.
Stugotz.
Roy, you sound like you have a stomach ache.
I do, actually. I'm hungry.
You don't sound like you're mysterious or anything like that. You're doing very... Yeah.
So this company, here are his clients. They include members of the Ruiz family, who also happen to be Santos campaign donors, who had never given him any money prior to 2022, according to public records. And Florida corporate filings show the two DeVolder LLCs were created about 2 weeks apart in January of 2022. Their leadership consists of relatives of billionaire Miami attorney John Ruiz, a personal injury and class action lawyer who parlayed his Medicare payor recovery business into what Daily Beast calls a multi-million-dollar IPO that flopped this summer. In September of 2021, Alex Ruiz, John Ruiz's son, then 22, became CEO of Cigarette Racing. A few months later, the Ruiz children created the entities that would retain the DeVolder organization. Myra Ruiz, the ex-wife of John Ruiz and the mother of the Ruiz children, also former baseball players at the U. Go Canes. Myra Ruiz told the Daily Beast they hired the DeVolder organization in early 2022, but did not reply to follow-ups. Now, in an interview, Santos named yacht sales as one of the tasks that DeVolder organization handled for its clients. On March 31st, Myra Ruiz contributed $10,800 to Santos's joint fundraiser committee. And the web extends beyond even the DeVolder organization's customers. Concurrent with Santos' second successful congressional bid, his sister ran a political action committee called Rise NYC PAC, the website of which doesn't exist anymore. The PAC also counted among its contributors the financier Andrew and Trader, cousin and money manager to the sanctioned Russian oligarch Viktor Veckelsberg, who contributed a combined $80,000 to the PAC per state records. As of September, the DeVolder organization in Florida was dissolved by the state for failing to file a report, the annual reports that corporations and LLCs are required to file. And yet mysteriously, after the New York Times, the Daily Beast, and all these people have talked about the lies of this man, it mysteriously appeared again at Sunbiz in Florida in December of 2022, just last month. Because, if it was just a shell company,
illegal,
it would be illegal. So now all of a sudden it's magically back as a Florida limited liability corporation. So it gets shadier and shadier and shadier and shadier. And we still don't really know what happened here, why it happened here. We know that John Ruiz is very upset about this connection being made in the press to him and is threatening litigation to anyone and everyone who repeats it. But again, all of this reporting came directly from the Daily Beast.
Unfortunately, we do not have time to get to the mayor appointing an election-denying Proud Boy as the vice chair of the International Trade Consortium. We do not have time to get to Mexico City now being safer than Miami. And we do not have time to get to Francis Suarez urging Elon Musk to move Twitter's headquarters from San Francisco to Miami. Maybe next week we will get to those things. But before we go any further, Billy, I would like for you to explain to the people why our next guest is on. Dixie Dent is a former judicial assistant to Martin Zilber. Martin Zilber was a Miami-Dade circuit judge before his recent resignation. So how would you like to introduce Dixie Dent, our next guest, to the audience?
So Miami-Dade Circuit Court Judge Martin Zilber, I should say disgraced ex-Miami-Dade Circuit Court Judge Martin Zilber, was first elected in 2014, and he began to serve in the Juvenile Dependency Division, Unified Family Court, and then the Felony Criminal Division of the Circuit Court, and eventually Circuit Civil Division, where people come with their grievances. When they feel that they've been wronged or injured, they come to civil court looking for relief. His most recent term was set to expire January of 2027. Instead, he resigned in disgrace last year, 2021, but Happy New Year, after a judicial assistant made a complaint to the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission, claimed that he was verbally abusive, that there were sexist attacks on her as a pregnant woman, that he may have allegedly defrauded the taxpayers by treating this public position as a no-show job and falsifying time cards during the pandemic when he was actually on vacation and not at work, reducing his judicial workload to only 3 days a week, that he also illegally forced her to work on his reelection campaign and knowingly signed judicial orders that he did not read, copying and pasting them. Sometimes they're being contradictory orders and, in fact, unconstitutional orders knowingly, and admitted such to her. This guy decided to resign instead of facing discipline by the JQC, which is the Judicial Discipline Board, that found that he violated about 10 canons of ethics. And they wanted to give him a 60-day suspension without pay and a $30,000 fine, ostensibly to pay back the taxpayers for the money he stole from us for not work or being in Malibu on vacation.
You have told us who Martin Zilber is. You have not yet told us who our guest is. Dixie Dent is next, and
no, this is why this is important. Why should we talk about this, Dan?
I'm asking myself that right now. I was asking you to explain that to the audience.
Dixie was so appalled, her lawyer wrote, that this was a slap on the wrist, this punishment that was proposed, and he should be removed from the bench and disbarred, if not be arrested for the crimes he committed. Instead, Dan, he resigned before he could be disciplined, where he now will enjoy, when he hits 65 or whatever, a $37,000 a year pension from the taxpayers of the state of Florida in Miami-Dade County.
Heady play by Martin Zilber.
And he became the partner at a very prominent commercial real estate law firm, of course, because Miami.
We're the worst.
And this weekend, Dan, city commissioners in Miami will attempt to appoint Martin Zilber to the vacated seat.
No.
On the Miami City Commission in District 2.
No.
The richest district and most real estate rich district in the city that Ken Russell just resigned from so he could have his failed run for Congress last year.
No.
So if you're talking about a disgraced, resigned ex-judge, a corrupt man who verbally abused a woman allegedly and allegedly defrauded taxpayers by treating his government position as a no-show job, who better, Dan, to sit on the City of Miami Commission? And so says Commissioner Alex Diaz-Laportilla and Commissioner Joe Carollo.
It's frozen.
Irregardless, he is the favored pick of those two because nobody loves no-show jobs and abusing women more than Miami Commissioner Alex Diaz-Laportilla and Commissioner Joe
You
Carollo.
have still not told me who Dixie Dent is and why. You've not told me who she is.
Dixie Dent is, from the beginning of my intro, the judicial assistant who filed the complaint against Judge Zilber that led to his resignation.
She's next. Joined now by Dixie Dent. She's the former judicial assistant to Martin Zilber. This is relevant because the Miami-Dade Circuit Judge, Martin Zilber, submitted his resignation after it was found out that he was doing things the Miami way, skipping work and making his staff run personal errands for him. That is not one of the job titles of his staff, but we are joined now by Dixie. And Billy, what do you think people need to know here on the front end before I start asking her about Zilber's very Miami judgeship about Dixie and the situation she finds herself in?
Well, Dixie, you were excited at first to get into this line of work in the public sector, weren't you? You were a bit of an idealist about the good you could do in the judicial system, no?
Naively, yes. I was very excited. I actually took a $30,000 annual pay cut to go work for the state.
And when did you first realize that something was amiss with Judge Zilber?
Right about my second month in.
What is it that you thought you were signing up for, and what is it that you were signing up for?
So I've been a paralegal for a bit, and I've had my own personal experiences with the 11th Judicial Circuit. And I thought that I was coming in there to run the judge's calendar, to make the judge available, to all these attorneys, especially in circuit court. You're talking about personal injury, auto accidents, first party cases, the occasional writ of mandamus, like real emergency type thing. But these attorneys out there that are privately practicing run into no availability on the docket or waiting 2-3 months to get in front of a judge. And they're real clients at the end of these cases that are being affected by the unavailability. So I thought I was going to come in there and actually do what I do best, which is manage the calendar and make it accessible.
What happened the second month? What revealed itself?
So what I started seeing was a pattern of just abuse, where I was being asked to cancel special set hearings. And, the excuse was, I'm taking a 4-day weekend, just because I can. I started witnessing just like childlike tantrums in chambers, having myself and the bailiff, who, by the way, are trying to remedy an already backlogged docket of cases because the judge had retired. His predecessor had retired. So these cases had been suspended in the docket for a bit. And, it's my job to get in there and get these cases heard. And now all of a sudden we're canceling special sets because we're taking a 4-day weekend.
Right. And Dixie, so you have civil court backlogged, people waiting for their day in court, waiting for justice, people who feel like they were wronged, they were injured. You have cases where there are plaintiffs or defendants who are dying in the hospital, and you're a judicial assistant. That is your title. But yet you were being treated suddenly as a personal assistant, right? On the taxpayer's dime.
Correct.
So what were you doing? What was the judge asking you and his bailiff to be doing during office hours?
Things that you can't make up, like go get my Art Basel tickets, during a jury trial. You're talking about, you're going to have your bailiff go to Miami Beach in the maddening traffic that is Miami during rush hour to get your Art Basel tickets.
And he wound up being late, right? I read your complaint. He wound up being late.
He wound up being late, and then, he got chastised. We were asked to go renew his tags. And, I stood my ground a lot of times, and I stood up for the bailiff a lot of times. And, that's where the judge and I butted heads. At one point, he asked me to drive him to an event, and he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the street, to get him there faster. And I said, I'm not an Uber driver. And, by the way, I don't have excess liability coverage. So you're better off in an Uber than in my car. And he stopped asking me after that, but there were just encounters that were completely unnecessary and just ridiculous.
So he was working 3 days a week. Is that correct?
For the most part, we're talking about a judge that really was doing the minimum to keep up the perception that he was doing a lot and wasn't really doing much.
So he's got you doing personal errands, shopping, his chauffeur. He sends the bailiff to Miami Beach to get his Art Basel tickets. The guy runs into traffic, shows back up late to court. A jury's waiting. And then the judge yells at the bailiff for going and doing the personal business that he sent him to do.
Taking too long on personal business,
Only working 3 days a week. So you have to move stuff off the calendar for Monday and Friday, like a college student at the University of Miami. But then he's got you doing work on his re-election campaign. Is that right?
Yeah. So he had me working after hours. And you have to understand, for myself, coming from private sector, this is my first time working not only, a job in public service, but working for the state where there's an HR department and you have, all these things. In private sector is very natural and very normal for you to go above and beyond and work beyond your hours as a paralegal or a case manager, because that's just the nature of the job. Again, you're in private sector. But when you're on the taxpayer's payroll per se, it's absolutely appalling that he's got me contacting the Bar Association, getting attorneys' email list to send out propaganda, email campaigns for his re-election campaign.
Which is in fact illegal, isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't know, by the way, until after. And that's when I told him I'm not doing this anymore. He even had me opening bank accounts for doing the paperwork to open the bank accounts. And then, while he was
for his campaign, you mean?
Yeah, for his campaign.
Wow. Okay.
You were asked to falsify information about how much he was working as well, correct?
Correct. And that was during the pandemic. And, the pandemic did something to all of us, I think, that opened our eyes. And for me, it opened my eyes to the inequity and the lack of access and just how off it was, right? Because here we have a judge who is only a judge for the title and like a popularity contest per se. Like if you're in, Miami Beach High or something still. And we're in a pandemic, you're not submitting your time off request because we're working remotely, but yet, you have me canceling the docket. You have me, rescheduling and putting things on the docket that in fact didn't happen except for one true emergency, which was a man on life support.
What do you regard as the most egregious or insulting of the requests, if those are the same answers or different answers, egregious and insulting?
When I shared with him that I was pregnant, his request for me to bring up his chair to the dais after he gave the bailiff a week vacation and had me doing both jobs, not getting paid overtime because you don't get paid overtime in the state, but being forced to work overtime, being asked to not take my lunches because personal friends were in trials that had nothing to do with Zilber and other judges, and they wanted to use his chambers as a lunchroom. And I have to give him access to the chambers, things like that, while I'm dealing with gestational diabetes. And I'm just a normal, regular person trying to make a living and have my insurance for me and my family. And I'm dealing with this entitled person who should have never been placed on the bench.
And Dixie, what did he say about your pregnancy? How did he characterize it?
I privately asked him to meet with me in his chambers. And I said to him, Judge, this is not something, and I want you guys to understand the way that this is set up. So each judge is set up like their own entity, right? It's not like the judges don't have a boss that you have an HR department, but the HR department is really there just as a buffer to protect the interests of the state. So you are truly, as a judicial assistant, and this is so important for people to understand, that you are under the discretion of this judge. You piss off that judge and you're going to get fired. There's no, there is no remedy. So I did the right thing. I pulled him aside and I said, Judge, look, I just found out that I may be pregnant, because I was actually I've had a long history with miscarriages. I was at an appointment for a histosonogram and I found out that I may be pregnant, but it would potentially result in a loss. And if that happened, which was my expectation at that time, I would need some time off. And I needed my boss to approve that time off, especially that I had just recently started. I had been there for maybe 3 months. And the insurance was so important at that juncture. So his reaction was just, this is the worst possible time for you to be pregnant. Like, I cannot believe that you're pregnant. It's going to ruin all of my plans. Well, his plans were to have me do, the bulk of his work, drafting his orders, doing his research, preparing his stuff and spoon feeding it to him so he could do the bare minimum and make up his mind about how he was going to rule, and get through these hearings really quick.
So, Dixie, in addition to the possible criminality of him treating this public position as a no-show job and arguably defrauding the taxpayers out of the money he was making during that time. In fact, he had admitted to it at one point. The judicial discipline body, in fact, found that he had violated about 10 canons of the Florida Code of Judicial Conduct. Having you do this personal business, disrespecting you in your pregnancy, having you do physical labor, carrying his heavy chair upstairs up onto his bench. In addition to,
you don't really have a question here.
I do.
You want to just list.
I want to review. I'm reviewing.
You want to list the group of things that he has done wrong that we have covered.
Compelled her under the threat of termination to illegally work on his reelection campaign.
We covered all of this.
But Dixie, you say in your complaint that
there's not a question here.
No, I believe Judge Zilber often acted on his whim and entered orders he knew violated the law. Most disturbingly, he repeatedly entered final judgments of foreclosure
you insist on reviewing.
In violation with Governor Ron DeSantis' executive order imposing a foreclosure moratorium due to the COVID-19 pandemic. He took perverse pleasure in abusing the power entrusted to him, especially in foreclosure cases. You claim that you witnessed him deliberately entering unconstitutional decisions.
In foreclosure cases and other cases where he allowed his personal bias to interfere with his judgment and was completely impartial. Absolutely. The sad
completely
part
partial, you
it,
mean, correct? He was completely partial, you mean, yes?
He was not impartial.
He was not impartial.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So can you describe in the foreclosure case, and there was another case in which there was a man, I believe, on his deathbed?
But that was during the pandemic, while he was forging his timesheet. Basically, he was saying that he was at work, he didn't put in any leave request, and he was out on vacation in Malibu, and that case came in, and that was an emergency motion to be heard because the hospital wanted to rescind life support, basically, and this man had COVID, and it was during a pandemic. I mean, it was life or death. Unfortunately, he did pass away.
And then the unconstitutional actions that he took, but he knew it. He admitted to you that he knew his findings.
That wasn't a specific case. That was a specific case against an association, a condominium association. There were one of the parties in the case, and his goal in entering this gag order essentially was to impede the members of the board of directors from having their meeting, to the point that an FBI agent reaches out to one of the counsels who passed away since litigation and asks to speak with him, and he has to notify the court. And there's an email from Judge Zilber asking me to prepare an order because he has to notify the court that this FBI agent has reached out and wants to speak. Like they couldn't speak. And Judge Zilber told me, I know that this is unconstitutional, but by the time they appeal me, the 30 days have gone by and they can't have their board of directors meeting. But then he entered an order mooting the appeal, right? So there was no consequence for his deliberate action.
Oh, and they had to go through the trouble, of course, probably of filing the appeal and paying the attorney's fees.
And the expenditure, of course. Sure.
So, Dixie, how do you feel when I tell you that there is a distinct possibility that this weekend the City of Miami Commission will appoint disgraced ex-Miami-Dade judge Martin Zilber to the City of Miami Commission to fill the seat vacated by recently resigned Commissioner Ken Russell?
Sounds like a hashtag because Miami headline to me.
Look at that. She's got the close for the segment
with the mic
right
drop.
there. Yes.
Holy
she
crap.
finished the segment off. I wanted to ask her another question about how long she was there and what was the last straw, but she already dropped the mic. So thank you, Dixie, for being on with us. We appreciate the time.
Thank you. You guys have a great day.
Remind you again that Billy's latest work, God Forbid, is on Hulu. It is the most popular documentary in the history of Hulu. It deserves to be. It is exceptional. Billy, thank you for being on with us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Feliz Ano Nuevo.